Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Joe Goldberg is here because we've got a couple of Joes. I have to be careful. Maybe I should call you Goldie.
Oh, yeah, that which was my nickname in football. Thank you very much. Yes, a pair of Joes.
Pair of Joes.
One Joe is a little bit more famous than the other Joe, so you have to decide which one. There'll be a quiz when the show is over. Who's the famous Joe? Who's me?
Well, it's got to be Goldie.
Yeah.
Everyone should know him from television, of course. On Discovery Channel, he's been involved in all sorts of programs. But he's got a new book coming out. It's called First Do No Harm. Joe Kenda, thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Before all of the television and the writing and all that happened, and you were a cop working, did you see it going where it is now?
Absolutely not, and no one would have ever thought that. If you walked up to me while I was standing in the street in a bad neighborhood, waiting for the coroner's van to come and collect my victim, and watching the sun come up, and one of my guys would tap me on the shoulder and they'd say, "Hey, Kenda, someday, you're going to be famous. You're going to be on television all over the world. You're going to be a New York Times best-selling author." I would have accused that guy of being on weapons-grade narcotics. No, I never thought that. It just sort of worked out. A living proof that even a blind pig finds an acorn once in a while.
Well, are you happy with it then? Are you surprised?
I'm very surprised. I'm very happy with it. I actually started doing it because my wife insisted I call the guy back. Initially, I was resistive of even talking to these people. They came to me. I didn't go to them. And finally, I said, "All right, peace in the family. I'll call this guy." I kind of liked the guy, and he said, "I'll pay you $100 to come to Denver, a short drive from me, to do a screen test." Yeah, $100? Yeah. Well, I was a retired policeman at that moment, and $100 to me was a lot of money. So I said, "Yeah, I'll drive, sure." So I drive up there. I'm the new guy. I'm in the studio with cameras and lights and people and cables everywhere. So I'm kind of fascinated by all the stuff in there. And I looked at this guy and I said, "What do you want me to talk about?" And he said, "Tell me about murder." Okay. So I did. Whatever came into my head for about 30 minutes. And I stopped and I stood up and I said, "Is that what you had in mind?" And everybody standing there with their mouth open. And I thought this didn't go well. So I said, "Let me ask you again. Is that what you had in mind?" "Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah." And so that's the way it started. I've never had a script. I say anything I want to say because those are my cases or now reviewing cases of other agencies. But initially, they were all my homicides that I talked about. I was responsible for 387 murders in my career to investigate and apprehend. I arrested and convicted 356 of those cases, 31 unsolved. The clearance rate of 92%, which is still a national record over that number of years. The current rate of solution for homicide in 2024, national rate, is 52.3%. I was 92, so I'm a little smarter than the average dude. I enjoyed the work. I thought it was a mission and not a job. The difficulty with it is you become emotionally destroyed by it, and by the time my career had ended, I knew it was time to go away because everything around me became white noise. I wasn't listening anymore. And when I walked out of there, I felt like somebody lifted an aircraft carrier off my head. I didn't walk out, I floated. And then I just hung out for a while. I had a lot of venom in me, and it took a while to lose that. But my wife brought that to my attention. I'd been retired for 2 years. And I was sitting at the kitchen table, and she said, "Hi." I said, "In case you haven't noticed, I've been sitting here for 2 hours." "Well, I've noticed." But she said, "No, you're the guy I married again." Because I wasn't a policeman when we got married. And I thought that was very nice.
Murder. You talk to these people for half an hour about murder. What is it about this subject matter that those of us who don't live in that world find so fascinating?
Well, first of all, I think the reality is that people are sick and tired of fiction. The Hollywood version of a criminal is a guy in a $6,000 suit and a private jet, and his associates have $2,000 suits, and they have a lot of meetings and they discuss things and so on. It couldn't be further from the truth. Everyday people get involved in murders. The result is the viewer can identify with that person. They say, "Well, that woman works in a grocery store, so do I. That guy is a delivery driver. Well, that's what I do. How the hell did he get involved in this?" And they become fascinated by the fact that this could be instructive to them as to how they could avoid becoming involved in this, or just fascinated by it because it seems so crazy, because it is crazy. But that's my personal opinion. Do I know that for a fact? Of course not.
How do you select the crimes that you use in your books? Like what is there a message in the crime or something that you learn from it that you want to tell people about, or is it purely entertainment?
No, it's about letting people, giving people some insight into their things in the world they should avoid. And if they don't, they very often become the same soul that they're so amazed by in that book. For example, in this book, it's about narcotics. Every single one of us, no matter how well educated we are, no matter how much we think about this, no matter how much we say we'll never get involved, can easily become involved and be destroyed by it. Narcotics are not magic, they're black magic, and they will kill you. And the people who create them for the sake of money don't care about how many they kill. It's about the money. In this particular book, I want to get that across. The book is about fentanyl, the worst narcotic ever created in the history of the world is fentanyl. It's synthetic. It's made from common chemicals. If you have the right formula, you can make fentanyl. If you don't, you can use the same chemicals to make ladies' shampoo. You can buy them through the mail. They're not restricted because they're commonly used in many products. So if you want to make a pound of fentanyl, the components for a pound of fentanyl are going to cost you about $200. If you want to make a pound of heroin, because all the components are illegal and are controlled, it's going to cost you $6,000 to make a pound of heroin. But fentanyl is 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin. It is incredibly powerful. Because it is so powerful, it requires infinitesimally small measurements of amounts to use to work as it's designed to work. But this isn't being done by a pharmaceutical company. It's being done by a moron in a garage. So they kill 150,000 of our people every year. Every year. 150,000 people between the ages of 12 and 40 for the most part. That's 3 times more than we kill in traffic accidents. And yet nobody seems to be all that concerned. It's been around since the 60s as an IV anesthetic because it has people have better outcomes. They wake up faster. They don't have the problems that morphine sometimes causes people. Used correctly, it's a very appropriate drug by doctors in an operating room, not by some idiot underneath the bleachers at the football game. So those kinds of things are very, very dangerous. And people have to understand that. They don't care if they kill you. We'll get someone else to buy it when you're dead. Police officers never knew what Narcan was. Now they have to carry 4 or 5 of them in their uniform to overcome overdose, maybe. If they get there in time, it works sometimes, not always. So that's why this particular book.
It's not a musical comedy kind of topic. How do you transfer that sort of realistic world into a fiction book with the things that are important and keep it sort of entertaining so the reader sticks with it?
Well, that's supposed to be the skill that's involved. I write it 5 or 6 times, and I throw it away every time. And then the 7th or 8th time, it seems pretty good. There is a level of easing someone into the scene. You've exposed somebody's dead. Okay, somebody's dead. How did he die? Well, it looks like he OD'd. But the average person immediately thinks, well, that person had it coming. He overdosed on a drug. No, he didn't have it coming. He thought he was using a drug like he's used other drugs. Except this is like no other. It will take your life in about a minute, and you're gone forever. So, yeah, it's a serious subject, of course it is. If you weave it correctly and you cause it to move along, and the reader becomes interested, well, gee, how'd that guy get that? Well, let me tell you how. And who provides that? Well, let me tell you that, too. And why is this happening? Well, we are a rich country. We consume 80% of narcotics on the planet because we can afford it. So the cartels see us as the golden egg. And since there's a lot of us, 335 million or so, they have a future in that business.
So after a long career like this, and you were saying how you were kind of, emotionally destroyed and stuff, how does one recover?
Over time, I think you're able to talk it out. I would come home. My wife and I met in high school. We've been married for 56 years. Never known anybody else who's her and I and our kids. I would come home and she'd say, how was today? Oh, it was fine. Because I wouldn't tell her, well, I saw an 8-month-old baby beat to death with a baseball bat because it cries so much. You're not going to tell her that. And then she'd turn on the news. And I'd be standing in front of 8 microphones and crime scene tape. You say, well, what about that on your quiet day? Well, there was that. And it just went like that. And it becomes, you stuff it down in you. You stuff the emotions down. Because you got a job to do. You don't have time to consider what is happening here, or the violence of it, or the autopsy results that you have attended. I've attended more than 500 autopsies. Colorado requires that police are summoned if you die outside the presence of a doctor or outside of a custodial medical environment to determine method and manner. Is it homicide, suicide, natural causes, and so on? There were 4 causes of death in this country until 1980. Murder, suicide, and natural causes and accidental death. Well, in 1980, we had to add a 5th one. Accidental drug involved. Because the intent is not to die. The intent is to feel good. But you die anyway. So it is so pervasive, we had to come up with a 5th cause of death. So as a result of all of that, you push those emotions away and continue working. You develop a black sense of humor, dark sense of humor, gallows humor, whatever you want to call it, because it's a defense mechanism. You can either laugh or you can cry. Crying gets very old. You tend to laugh because it's a defense. But after so many years, it doesn't work anymore. It becomes overwhelming. So when I started this process, not only the TV, but writing, I found it to be therapeutic. I could talk out what I was feeling about that I'd never expressed to anyone, including my wife. I've said more to that camera than I've ever said to her. And I felt better. I released some of the demons. Now, some of them never go away, which is your question about PTSD. Do I have PTSD? Yes, I do. I'm a poster boy for PTSD. Of course I have it. I have to live with it. I've overcome some of the lashing out that I used to do because I do have it. And I've become a little more livable with, my wife reports, because I have adjusted to it better than I ever did before. But it never goes away. You can't unsee what you've seen, no matter how hard you try. It's the way things are. You've been exposed to things you should have never been exposed to. But guess what? It's the price of the work. So I have 5 recurring nightmares. I have them all the time.
Because you're talking about having your personal changing over time, how it affected you, how you dealt with it. I want to ask sort of a question that, from a writing point of view of, you started a long time ago and your book is set. Isn't it like in the 70s?
Right.
That's a whole different world. I mean, I was in high school. There was no social media. There's no internet. There's none of this stuff. And now in every book, you solve it by getting the phone. You solve it by tracing the position of the phone and you geolocate it. Every crime is solved by the phone with a DNA test. How has it changed? How has it changed for you from then to now? And how did you relay that into the book for your characters? I'm assuming you left social media and the internet out of it.
Absolutely.
Obviously, because it didn't exist.
It didn't exist. The law enforcement changes with the science that goes with it. The most dramatic change is DNA. But that's not always the case. It's not always available. Unless it's a sex crime or transfer of fluid, something like that, blood from a suspect found at the scene who gets hurt also. For example, in a multiple stabbing, the perpetrator is almost always severely injured because he's using a knife and he's using great force. And when he produces blood with that knife, it gets all over the knife, including all over his hand. And his hand slides down the knife off the handle, and he has a deep incised wound in his hand because he's sliding down the blade. So you do find blood at a crime scene, not a sex crime. The perpetrator's been hurt. The person he killed defended himself, hit him with something, maybe even shot him, whatever. And so you find things like that. In all of my career, which ended in 1996. I used DNA in 1991. Before that, it was unheard of and unused in American courts. It wasn't used in England until 1988. And the testing results of that program, DNA analysis in 1988, you required a microliter of tissue, fluid, or blood to determine identity. That's a lot. Now, due to advances, because science does, touch your desk, and I'll tell you who you are from the amino acid in your fingerprint. That's how far it's come. As far as the social media and all of that, that's all nonsense anyway, unless you're curious about what a 12-year-old girl thinks about today's headlines. So we never paid any attention to that. But there were people, even back then, in the 90s, that would use social media to brag about what they've been doing. There were often cases where sicarios, who are killers, hitmen for the cartels, would take pictures of their victim if they're standing on their chest, show them to their friends. And that's when you have a guy in interrogation and say, Ernesto, your lawyer's going to hate this photograph. He's really going to hate that. Oh, look, gee, you're holding the murder weapon. Remarkable. Were your friends impressed? We'll see what the jury thinks. So those things do change over time. But you don't solve cases that way. You do some. You solve cases the way you always do. You talk to people and you look them in the eye and see how they react when you touch a nerve. That's what solves cases.
In the cases you write about, how do you decide what you're going to use as fictional and what is going to be true? Like, where do you draw that line?
Well, you think about it, and you know how it's going to be in reality, and you know I've had 217 trials for first-degree murder, so I understand the system very well, and what works for a jury and what doesn't. In my fiction writing, I tend to speak to the issues that juries are attentive to, and they're not attentive to expert testimony. Expert testimony puts guys to sleep in a jury box. They don't understand it. They don't know who the guy is. He is speaking through his speak. For example, a doctor. You put a doctor on the stand. Doctor, did you have an occasion to examine the victim in this case? Yes. And what were your findings? He suffered a through and through gunshot wound to the anterior thorax. You mean he got shot in the chest, Doc? Well, yes. And it exited his back? Well, yes. Well, why don't you say that? Well, I can't do that because I'm a doctor. I have to sound smart. The same thing applies to all experts. We had a guy talk about paint once in a murder case. He was a chemist for a paint company. We found paint on the suspect's clothing. It came from a particular can that was owned by the victim. So we wanted to know, is there a chemical match? Is this paint on his clothes from that can? Well, it was. But it took him 3.5 hours to come up with that by describing the chemistry involved in making paint. And we couldn't get him off the stand. He never took a breath. He was in hog heaven telling a jury about this. The juries collapsed in their chairs, and we could all go home that night and make paint in our garage. But the only question we want to know is it out of that can? So I do the same thing when I write. I keep it within reason. What would you find interesting? What would lead a reasonably cautious person to believe a crime has been committed and that a particular person is likely to be the one who committed that crime? And that's where I lead the reader, that way, not with all the picayune methods and things to ask and things to say and things to find. And no, let's just talk about this. What do you think? Here's what he says. Here's what the crime scene says. So that's how I do it.
Well, let's go with that. You're talking about the people listening to a testimony and how the juries react. How much did you think about your readers, a legion of viewers, as you're constructing your fiction materials? Were there things that you said, besides gore, that I'm not going to put into this, my readers or viewers may not be as interested in that? Were they looking over your shoulder as you were writing, in some sense?
Well, yes, in some sense, I think that's true. I don't think there's any purpose in speaking about the gore in any detail. The mind's eye can easily understand that when someone dies violently, it is ugly. There's not much point in talking about that. And I don't see any point in doing it for the value of upsetting people or having them wonder about this. That's not the point. The point is, somebody killed this person with intent. Why did they do that? And who are they? And how do we go about finding them? That's the real focus, not the details of the gunshot wounds or the blade or whatever else is used. A little of that, but very little.
In general, what do you think people get wrong about policing in real life?
Well, that depends on your point of view. If you're a member of the media, the only thing you're interested in about the police is failure, because that's the only thing the media is interested in, period. They're also interested in blood. If it bleeds, it leads. Then we have to demonstrate that the people involved in that process are inept. Or worse than that, they're evil, and perhaps they need to be arrested as well, and on it goes. The average person is fearful of the police because they just are. What happens to me if the police come to my house? What happens if they start asking me questions I'm very uncomfortable with? And on and on. So there's a wide range of reaction to the police. There are people who admire the police. There are people who hate the police, and so on and so on, like everything else. It is obvious for the past 20 years that, and much longer actually, true crime has an audience. Remember the days? You don't remember the days because you're too young, but remember the days of the Police Gazette. publications, the Mickey Spillane, and the private detective, and so on and so on. It's always been there. And the primary audience for that are women, which in itself is very interesting. Women are the ones who buy mystery novels. They're also the ones that watch TV about true crime. My audience is 87% female, and 9 seasons of Homicide Hunter, and now 4 seasons or so of the newest show I've got. They're women. Hundreds of thousands of women who watch it religiously. And everyone I meet on the street, in an airport, in a restaurant, I'm your number one fan. Well, thank you very much. But it's a woman saying that, very seldom a man, which I always thought was kind of intriguing.
And when we talk to fiction writers, one of our questions usually comes around to, what do you think about bad guys? They go, oh, I love to write the bad guys. They're much more interesting than the other people. So you know bad guys. But translating those bad guys into fiction, how is that for you?
Well, it's easy because you base it on the facts, but just misidentifying the name. I've met those guys. I've met the people that do the crime jobs in this book. You don't talk about them in reality because you can't use their name. So you make up a name, but as to what they do, it's realistic, totally realistic. There are those among us who are blessed with a certain moral flexibility. I'll explain it this way. It's the best way to explain it, really, I think. If you put up a sign on your driveway that says, don't park here and block my driveway, please, 98% of the world won't park there because there's a sign that says not to. 2% of the world will park there anyway because they're special and the rules don't apply to them. They do what they want. I spend 100% of my time with the 2%. The people who are blessed with that certain sense of moral flexibility that does anything their instincts tell them. If they're sociopathic, if they're a number of different things who are mentally incapacitated, they will do predictable things. And they won't remember it 5 minutes after they do it. Because it doesn't mean anything to them. Those are the real bad guys. The bad guys that have absolutely no sense of anything. And that's what the public has difficulty with. You often hear people say, there's good in everyone. No, there isn't. Not everyone. There are no absolutes in human behavior. There are people that it doesn't bother them at all to kill a kid, a woman, anybody. Because at that moment, they're angry and they're going to take it out on somebody. What they do. And if you've never been around it, truly around it, and talking to these people, and wanting to take a shower when you leave the interrogation room, you don't know that. You think you know it, but you really don't, because you've never been exposed to it. And if you are, you won't forget it. I talked to a guy once in an interrogation, talk about bad guys. Okay? He rapes, murders, bludgeons, prostitutes. He had a dream and he wanted to make it live, so he went and found a real human to do this with. However, he's a true schizophrenic. He has 2 personalities in him. He is married. He's in a family business. He has a daughter. He is a pillar of the community. He's also a butcher in his spare time. And I have evidence, physical evidence, that absolutely identifies him as the guy. He cut off the girl's hair and kept it as a souvenir and taped it to the back of a dresser in his bedroom to conceal it from his family. I found that in a search warrant. I'm talking to this guy for several hours, and I get nowhere. I get denial, tears. You possibly think anybody could do this, let alone me. I've never gotten a parking ticket in my life. But there's another guy in him, and you occasionally see flashes of it when he gets mad. But just flashes. And I want to talk to that guy. I don't want to talk to you anymore, because you're no fun. Let me talk to the other guy. So in the course of this interrogation, I'd run out of ideas. And I said, what do you like to think about every day? What do you mean? People have favorite dreams. They like to think about being wealthy, maybe marry a movie star, play football. What do you think about? And he turns his head and looks at me and says, well, I can't tell you that. Because you'll get mad at me. Here's our other guy. Well, hello, sir. Let's carry on with this. He started holding hands with me because he was physically excited about telling me what he likes to think about. He says, I like to think about screwing women in their own blood while they're dying. Don't you like to think about that? And that's a critical moment. So I said, well, I have thought about that. Really? Now we're kindred souls. Holy smokes. I'm going to stick a gun in his mouth and pull the trigger. There's a bad guy. What do you do with him? Wrap him in barbed wire and spoon feed him? Because if you ever let him go, oh, he's going to do this again. And he's going to enjoy just as much as he did this time. So you have to be honest enough to show how bad people can be. And nobody really wants to think about that because it's scary. But they are scary.
How do you not be jaded with people after so many years of working with the bad 2%. And that's how, I mean, how can you not look at just everyone that way? You know what I'm saying when you go out?
I do, but I had a plan. I suspected that was the case when I started the work, that you got to stay away from policemen socially. We never went to the police ball. We never went to parties with policemen. We never associated with anybody in criminal justice. It was always other people. Guys in the military, Colorado Springs, which is where I worked, is a big military town. I got Fort Carson Air Force Academy, Peterson Air Force Base. Lots of military people, pilots, tank commanders, lots of weapons companies. They have engineers and so on, those people, and all kinds of different people. I never associated with cops. So much so, for example, my wife. I'd been on the job for 20 years. No one in the department had ever seen her. I didn't have a picture of her in my office. I didn't have anything. Nobody even knew if I was married. All they knew was I was the boss. So my wife comes into police headquarters, first time in 20 years, gets greeted at the front desk, which is a totally secure facility, of course, by civilians who are not policemen at the desk. They're women, called police service representatives. And she said, I need to speak to Lieutenant Kenda. And the woman said, well, do you have an appointment? Well, I don't need an appointment. I'm his wife. So it goes through the building like wildfire that not only is Kenda married, but it's in the building. So now we got people looking around corners of doorways like so what do you think? Is it a girl? I mean, what do you think? A human? Yes, you know. And she's backed into the corner by the time I get downstairs. I said, what's the matter? She said, everybody's staring at me. I said, well, they wanted to see if you're a girl. Come on with me. But that's what I did. I avoided that. And it allowed me to understand that 98% of the world is just fine. 2% isn't. You leave the 2% at work, and you spend your time with the 98%, then you don't get that reaction. You don't become terrified of humans. I'm not terrified of them. I'm just a little cautious, but I'm not terrified.
So, listen, I guess now, this is a silly question, but do you do social media? Do you have a website? Do you have all that thing?
Nope. There are fan sites that exist on all the social media things, and that's all created by the TV network or by fans. There are two women in Wales in England that have this huge Facebook thing. A couple 100,000 people on there. And they're sisters, and they created it themselves about the show and song, because it plays all over the world. It's in 15 languages. It's everywhere. And so it's really strange. The amount of reaction to that is just remarkable. But I'm not a creator or a purveyor of any of those.
Well, I appreciate you being here. The book, First, Do No Harm. Our guest is the author, Joe Kenda. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.